It is said that the fairy king, Finvara, has a preference for spiriting away the prettiest young women of the land. He takes them to his palace, where beautiful music always plays, and where time passes as in a dream, and they forget the world they left. Once, a great lord had a beautiful wife named Ethna. He was most proud of her, always holding festivals in her honor and showing her off there. However, one evening as she walked at his side in a beautiful dress, she suddenly swooned into a faint from which she could not be roused. She was carried to her bed and watched until morning, when she at last awoke. She said then that she had dreamed of spending the night in a beautiful palace surrounded by music, and that she was so happy there in the dream that she longed to return. That evening, she again fell into a deep slumber from which she did not stir, and her old nurse came to sit watch over her. The old woman, however, fell asleep as the night passed in silence, and when she woke, it was to find Ethna gone. All searched, but none could find her, and her husband was grieved. Remembering the tales of Finvara, the young lord rode in haste toward the fairy hill, for though the two had long been friends, with many gifts and casks of wine exchanged between them, he now feared that the fairy king had betrayed him, and taken Ethna himself. At the Rath, as he rested his horse, he heard two voices speak from the air overhead, discussing the kidnapping, as was his fear, and that, if the lord dug down into the center of the fairy hill, he would eventually come upon Finvara's palace and Ethna within. But that would be too much for any mortal man, and Finvara had great power besides. The lord called together all the workmen of his lands, and set them to the task of digging out the center of the hill. For 3 days they dug and dug, but every night all the earth they moved was returned to their trench, so no progress was made, and all were beginning to despair. Then another voice came to the lord as he pondered this problem, telling him to sprinkle salt upon the moved earth, and then it would not be undone. He ordered this done, and that night the trench remained, and so all renewed their labors the next day with new hope, and the trench in the hill grew deeper and deeper, until the fairies below began to get rather nervous, for if so much as a spade head scraped the top of the palace, it would vanish like mist. At last Finvara's own voice rang out to all, offering to give Ethna back if the workmen laid down their tools and halted their work. This was accepted, and Ethna was returned, but it was not a happy return, for she moved and lived like one in a trance, never speaking, nor smiling, whatever was done. All feared that she had eaten fairy food while in Finvara's care, and thus she would ever be lost, even while they had her form with them. Thus a year and a day passed since her return, and as the young lord was out riding, he again heard fairy voices discussing his plight, and the only way to break the curse that lay on his young wife. He must remove the girdle from her waist, and the enchanted pin that held it, then burn the girdle in fire and bury the pin in earth, and she would then, and only then, be freed of fairy influence. The lord rushed back to his home and did these things, and though Ethna did not move or speak at the burning of the girdle alone, once he had buried the pin in the earth beneath a fairy thorn, where none would disturb it, she came alive again at once, as though waking from a long dream, and once more they were happy together. As for Finvara, he never tried to carry Ethna off again, and the deep cut in the hill remains to this day, called the Fairies' Glen.